Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm here on Zoom today, and I just want to welcome everyone to the Humanists of Greater Portland Sunday morning meeting. My name's Helen Christians, and I'll be your MC this morning. The Humanists of Greater Portland is a chapter of the Humanist Association. It is my strong belief that the all volunteers who make the Humanists of Greater Portland a vibrant organization is an example of the power of humanism. Humanism is an outlook or system of thought attaching primary importance to the human experiences and the wonder of the natural world rather than the supernatural beliefs. Humanist beliefs stress the potential value and goodness of human beings and the importance of solving human problems by staying curious and open as we humanists listen to others' thoughts and then speak our own truth through the pillars of science, reason, and free inquiry. Our topic at today's meeting, Mobile Medics International, the worldwide and humanitarian aid, especially addresses the humanist commitments of service, altruism, and global awareness. Kathy Humble will be our reader this morning. She always does such a great job. Kathy, are you there?
Okay. I'm going to read from The Light We Carry by former First Lady Michelle Obama. And Mrs. Obama's latest book was published just a few months ago. I'll read from the first chapter called The Power of Small, which reflects her experience learning to knit for the first time at the start of the COVID lockdown, but it's much broader than that. I've come to understand that sometimes the big stuff becomes easier to handle when you deliberately put something small alongside it. When everything starts to feel big and therefore scary and insurmountable, when I hit a point of feeling or thinking or seeing too much, I've learned to make the choice to go toward the small. On days when my brain apprehends nothing but monolithic catastrophe and doom, when I feel paralyzed by not enoughness and my agitation begins to stir, I pick up the knitting needles and give my hands a chance to take over, to quietly click us out of that hard place. In knitting, when you create the first stitch of a new project, you cast on. When an item is finished, you bind off. Both of these actions, I've found, are incredibly satisfying, the bookends of something manageable and finite. They give me a sense of completion in a world that will always and forever feel chaotic and incomplete. Anytime your circumstances start to feel all-consuming, I suggest you try going in the other direction, toward the small. Look for something that'll help rearrange your thoughts, a pocket of contentedness where you can live for a while. Maybe, like me, you are hard on yourself. Maybe you see every problem as urgent. Maybe you want to do big things with your life, to drive yourself forward with a bold agenda, not wasting a single second of time. That's all good, and you are not wrong to want to go for big things. But once in a while, you'll want to allow yourself the pleasure of a small feat. You're going to need to step back and rest your brain from all the hard problems and wearying thoughts, because the hard problems and wearying thoughts will always be there, largely unfinished and mostly unfixed. The holes will always be big, the answers slow to come. So in the meantime, claim a small victory. This is the power of small, where the intermediate steps matter, where it can be relieving to engage in what's immediately in front of you, and where a start can more readily lead to a finish. This is how we move from it's all too much back in the direction of I've got this. Thank you.
Kathy, thank you. That was really good and such good advice. Thank you so much. I would now like to introduce Teresa Gray, who will be speaking on Mobile Medics International, which is an all-volunteer group of medical professionals who travel around the world to help people after natural disasters, and also those folks who live in chronically medically underserved areas. Teresa is the founder and executive director of Mobile Medics International. She started her medical career as an EMT and continued her education and training to be certified as a SWAT paramedic, critical care flight medic, and a registered nurse. She comes to us today on Zoom from her home in Alaska. In 2022, Teresa was recognized as one of CNN's top 10 Heroes of the Year, which was quite an honor and a significant honor. There's that I hope she tells us a little bit about. Teresa, thank you so much for joining us this morning and to share what I'm sure is going to be some amazing stories of the work you do. Teresa will take questions after her formal presentation, and come on in. We're so excited. I am very, very excited about hearing your stories. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for asking me to speak today. I'm Teresa Gray. As she said, I am the founder and executive director of Mobile Medics International, and we're an organization that takes entirely volunteer medical personnel to humanitarian aid crisis, medically underserved areas, and disaster areas around the world. In the last 7 years, we have been to 24 countries on 5 continents. We haven't been to Antarctica or Australia, but I'm still working on that. So we do a lot of international travel. And I'm going to be doing a slideshow presentation about just the missions that mobile medics have been on over the years, sort of logistically how we do them, the medicine that we practice, and how we sort of make it all come together. And then I'll leave time at the end for any questions that anybody has. So does anybody have questions before I start? Nope. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and start my slideshow. Okay, can everybody see the slideshow?
Yes,
Yeah?
I can see it.
Okay, good. All right, so Mobile Medics International mission statement is from Louis Pasteur. One does not ask of one who suffers, what is your country? What is your religion? One merely says you suffer, and that is enough for me. So we believe that healthcare is a basic human right, period, no exceptions. So one of the first missions that we started doing in 2016, and you can see we repeated it 17, 18, 19, and 20, and then had to take a hiatus because of the pandemic, was to the Philippines. And the Philippines is a chronically medically underserved area. We went initially for hurricane response, and the area that we went to, we realized that they had no medical within 3 or 4 hours. And the medical they did have was, even for Filipino standards, was pretty poor. So we trained these individuals to be community health aides in their own community. It was actually a 5-year initiative. We started out by teaching them basic first aid, and then we progressed them to be able to do just basic healthcare within their community. We provided them with all the equipment, all the supplies. We helped them build a clinic, and then we stocked it for the first 5 years. And we continue to this day to do telemedicine for them. So if they run into issues that they're not sure what to do with, they call me or they send me pictures, usually of some weird rash that they're like, what is it? And I'm like, I don't know. So we just sort of try to figure it out together. We also bring in local medical people to be mentors and resources for them when we step out. Mobile Medics does not believe that you should make any community medically reliant on you. You should empower them to be stewards of their own healthcare. So these individuals, we would do clinics and see hundreds and hundreds of patients a day. We would see them in conjunction with the people that we trained, and then eventually we just monitored them while they were seeing the patients themselves, just sort of, like I said, a 5-year initiative. We did everything from, this is Cebu, we did everything from main island to remote islands. This island, what I love about this picture, first of all, is this is a remote island completely off grid, no electricity, no running water. You can see they lived in little thatch huts, but we would go here every year. And what I loved is the kids were always waiting for us, and they found an American flag for us. So every time we showed up, they had an American flag flying for us. So I have a special place in my heart for my little Filipino people. So let me see. Yep. All right. Then we've done a number of responses to Haiti, unfortunately. But in 2016, we went and did Hurricane Matthew. This was logistically challenging because you couldn't get where you needed to be unless you went by helicopter. And so they dropped us into this village in Haiti and left us for a week, and then just came back and picked us up. This used to be their hospital. And the reason we were there is because this is what their hospital looked like, and everything was completely destroyed. They had nothing. This is what we made into a hospital. We had a shelter box, and again, this was a disaster response. So this was about primary care medicine, emergency medicine, people who had been injured in the hurricane, or again, they're chronically medically underserved pre-hurricane. So there was a lot of pre-existing conditions that we were able to help. We also were stationed at an orphanage. And so we did well child checks for every orphan that was in the area. And we were there about 10 days, and then the helicopter showed up and took us back to Port-au-Prince. So Houston, Texas, Hurricane Harvey, again, a disaster response. The challenges with an American response versus an international response, there's actually a significant difference. I am limited in the medicine that I'm allowed to practice within the United States. I am usually not limited in the level of medicine I'm allowed to practice in foreign countries. All areas were covered by the Good Samaritan law, but there's just a difference logistically and medicine-wise. So hurricane response isn't usually, especially in America, is usually not about injury from the hurricane. It's usually about things like this. The entire house has been flooded. It's full of black mold. This is people's livelihood, their entire lives sitting out on curbs. And so they've lost their medication. They've lost their ability to monitor their blood sugar. They've lost their ability to check their blood pressures, people that are on oxygen, kids that are being, tube fed, those types of things, because they have no electricity. So those are the things that we kind of deal with an American response. This again was in Houston, Texas. You haven't lived until you've had some abuela hugs. So these ladies, they were trying to cook for us. They were trying to feed us. They were, you name it. They were trying to take care of us, which I find that actually worldwide. We show up and the communities want to take care of us. And we're like, actually, it's the other way. We're here for you. So this is also one of my very favorite pictures, abuela hugs. Puerto Rico, again, we go to Puerto Rico quite frequently, especially in the last couple of years. This was our 2017 response for Hurricane Maria. The problem in Puerto Rico is, even though it's an American territory, it's a third world country. So their medicine is chronically lacking. Their infrastructure is usually lacking. And their building codes do not have to meet hurricane standards, so hurricane or earthquake standards. So when they have a disaster, it's usually on a global proportion. One of the biggest issues is people live up in the hills of Puerto Rico and nothing is paved. So it's very difficult when they have hurricanes and the continual rain. They get a lot of mudslides. They get a lot of, so you can't get up into the barrios up in the mountains. So one of the things that Mobile Medics does is, I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. I'm sure most of you have heard of places like Doctors Without Borders and these large organizations that come in and they set up a field hospital in a very specific spot, and people come to them, and they're absolutely amazing. The problem is that you have to get there. So if you don't have the ability to get there, if you don't have transportation, if your road is blocked, if you're too sick for whatever reason, that's where we come in. That's why I founded MMI, to be a mobile medical response. All of our medical equipment is in backpacks, and we are able to get to where the people are. We do not set up permanent structures for them to come to us usually. So we're sort of, because my expertise is in pre-hospital medicine, we're kind of a pre-hospital, we're like the ambulance service for post-disaster, so to speak. So in this particular trip in Puerto Rico, because the roads were in such poor condition, I did a couple of things. I found this group of veterans that was there just trying to help, and they had chainsaws and shovels and all kinds of stuff. And then I found a local farmer who had donkeys. And so we all got on donkeys, and my vets, we would go up these back roads on these donkeys because you couldn't take vehicles, and then they would chainsaw trees out of our way, or buildings or whatever. So we worked collectively to be able to get to the villages or the barrios where they needed our help. So we do work collaboratively. We also try to make sure that we're sort of all inclusive, because medicine doesn't matter if you're hungry, right? And food doesn't matter if you're sick. And so food, water, and medicine should go hand in hand. And when a place has had a major disaster, it may be the first time it's ever happened for them, and people don't know where to go and they don't know what to do. But because we've done so many disaster responses, we know who's in country, we know who the players are, we know who's got food, who's got water, who's got fuel for generators, who's got a generator, and we try to gather them together. We found the veterans with chainsaws, we found the people that were serving food, and we were able to load up vehicles with food and water, and then us as medicine, and go up into these places and give these communities kind of a whole package of care. And we try to do that everywhere we go. This was one of the logistic problems in Puerto Rico. So food and medicine is on this side, the people are on this side. And so we just walked it across. Like, we put people down in this ravine and we just handed stuff over until it was all on the side we wanted it to be on. And then we carried on from there. So we sometimes have the ability to do things that other larger organizations that are stationary don't necessarily have the ability to do. So it's a very symbiotic working relationship. If we find a patient that needs surgery or is beyond our medical capabilities, I know where Doctors Without Borders is stationed, and we will get the patient to them, those types of things. So we try to all work really well together. Lesbos, Greece is a refugee crisis. So this is the Syrian refugees fleeing Syria, coming to Turkey, getting on boats and coming over to Lesbos Island. There is currently a movie on Netflix called Swimmers, and I would recommend that you watch it. The two girls featured in that movie, I pulled out of the Aegean Sea when they landed on Lesbos Island. It's about two young girls that were championship swimmers in Syria. Their boat motor quit halfway across to Lesbos, and they had to swim the rest of the way. And one of the sisters then swam in the Rio Olympics. So it's Sarah Mardini is my friend's name. So watch that. I'm not in it, but I know these girls well, and they're amazing. So Lesbos, Greece, the problem with all refugee crisis is where to put them, what to do with them, how to feed them, how to house them, especially if you are not, if that's not the infrastructure. So on Lesbos, they had an abandoned prison, literal prison, where they housed all the refugees. And these are the conditions that they are currently, to this day, still living in. This crisis is still ongoing. It is no longer on America's forefront because it's happening over in Europe, and it's sort of, lost its appeal, so to speak. But this humanitarian aid crisis, refugee crisis, is still ongoing. But this is the camp. It floods often. They're living in UNHCR tents. It does get cold in Greece, and it does snow on Lesbos. So it gets very, very cold and difficult. So when we go to do medicine here, it's usually kids with pneumonia and ear infections and all the things that you would expect of people living in tents year round, as well as anytime you get large numbers of people in a singular group, you get outbreaks of like norovirus and leptospirosis, and the sanitation isn't good. So you have all of those issues that go along with it. We try to focus on everybody, but we really, I think as would be expected, have a soft spot for the kids. So we try to see every child that we possibly can, even if they appear to be okay. So, I love the kids. American Samoa, which is an American territory, as you can see in the South Pacific, was hit by a cyclone, which is basically a hurricane. This is a team that I took there. It is a very small, tiny island. And so the impact of this hurricane was significant because, again, it's an American territory, but it's a third world country. Their medicine is third world, like Puerto Rico's. We hold American Samoa because it's got a very, very deep port, and we house submarines in the South Pacific there. That's why we hold it as an American territory. So entire houses were destroyed. And again, we spent a lot of time focusing on children. So families would come together and all live together in the house that was least damaged. So you'd have generations of people living in the same house. You'd have 10, 12 kids and 8 or 10 adults, all living together with no electricity, no running water, inadequate food, et cetera, et cetera. So we focus on the kids and the elders. This is one of my volunteers. His name is Sean, and he's from Ireland. He works in London, but he's from Ireland. All of my volunteers are from all over the world. I don't just take American volunteers. If you hold a medical license, a valid medical license in any country, we will take you as a volunteer. And so Sean is from Ireland, works in London. Tijuana, Mexico was a refugee crisis, the Mexican-American border. I'm sure that you guys all remember. This, by the way, is Miles Dickinson, whose father is part of your organization, I think is on today. Miles is an emergency room physician. He is an amazing asset to our team and has been on a number of our missions. But this entire group is volunteers, volunteer medical personnel who give up their time to go on these missions. This was the San Diego-Tijuana border when that crisis was at its height. When hundreds and thousands of people were approaching the border. And these are not people that were trying to climb a wall. These were people that were presenting themselves to a border, which is what's required by the United States, and seeking asylum. So we had a very small clinic that was literally right on the border that the patients could come to. We brought our own interpreters. Some of our folks spoke Spanish, some of them don't, but we bring our own interpreters because medical interpretation is very specific. And usually general interpretation, things sort of get lost. So we have an entire roster of interpreters that speak a myriad of different languages that we can use to bring with us to make sure that when we're asking medical questions and getting medical answers, that we do our assessments properly. It's very important that we understand what the patient is saying for a couple of reasons. I probably will never see them again. And the answers to their questions are the only indication I have of what's wrong with them, because we do not have diagnostic testing capability with the exception of pregnancy and COVID tests. Otherwise, we have to rely on questions and answers in order to determine what's wrong. There's no x-ray. I can tell if you've got a broken bone by using a tuning fork. So if I put a tuning fork on a joint above or below where I believe the break may be, your level of pain will tell me whether it's a sprain or a break. So it's very rudimentary medicine. It's very effective, but the questioning is important, was kind of my point. This is the line. So we had our clinic, and then every morning we would go to this fence. The side that you're looking at is Mexico, Tijuana, Mexico. The other side of that white fence is San Diego, California. And they would call numbers and they would load people on buses and they would take them over to the United States to have a court hearing to seek asylum. But when they were done, they would bring them back and drop them back off. Now, these people don't live in Tijuana. They've come from all over Mexico and Guatemala and a number of other places. So they're living on the streets. And their court hearings were usually 4 to 6 months in advance. This is also the time where children and their parents were being separated. And I won't spend a lot of time talking about the politics of it all, but you remember the separation of the children and their parents. So one of the things that we would do is we would write on any child that was not old enough to speak or remember. We would write their mother and father's telephone number, the child's name, the mother's name, and her birth date on the child's arm in Sharpie. So when this child was taken from her mother, at some point, our hope was that they would be able to find the mother again and bring them back together. So we spent a lot of time writing on babies with Sharpies. Sometimes women would come back without their children. This woman left with 3 children and came back with none. And she didn't know where they were. She didn't know what happened to them. They separated them when she went to court, and she came out to get her asylum date and came out, and they brought her back to Mexico with no children. They also took her asthma and her blood pressure medication. So we spent a lot of time, again, reassessing and handing out medication. Mozambique, Africa was a hurricane. Africa is particularly challenging because of the amount of people and their underlying medical conditions to start with. Almost all of our patients had either TB, malaria, or HIV as a baseline for their medicine. And then on top of that, they've now experienced a hurricane that has made it, they don't have access to food. The ground had cholera in it, leptospirosis and diseases, animals that have been killed during the hurricane that end up in the water source, then contaminating the water source. So this was a really challenging mission. It was an amazing mission because this physician right here is from Malaysia, and she's Muslim, and then Sean is from Ireland. And so we had a myriad of different nationalities and religion that all came together to help the people of Mozambique. The damage in Mozambique was significant. Most of them live in mud huts, which are stick structures. You can kind of see a little bit here. Stick structures in like a crisscross pattern that they then pack with mud, and then the sun dries it. And under normal circumstances, it's a pretty effective house. But when it torrentially rains and you get a hurricane, all the mud dissolves. And so now you're just left with a stick structure that's not adequate. We ended up setting up in front of what used to be the maternity ward. We could not stay inside the building. Number one, it had no roof, and number two, it was full of black mold. So these tents are where we stayed, and this is how we ate every day. So we had, these are basically MREs. They're meals that you just add hot water to, which are really good for about the first 2 days, and then you're over it. Like, then you just want something crunchy, like, because everything is hot and mushy. And then you're like, what I wouldn't give. So after this mission, believe it or not, we now, when we're doing these truly austere missions where this is how you're going to live for the next 10 days, someone will usually bring like a can of Spam. And none of us eat Spam on a regular basis at home. But when you're in the middle of Africa and you've eaten nothing but mush for 4 days, you fry up a little Spam. I'm telling you, it's some of the best food you'll ever have in your life. I can tell you, however, we shared our Spam with some of the Africans that were there, and they were so disgusted that they wouldn't even eat it, and they didn't have any food. So that tells you, like, they were not having it. So I thought it was interesting. Africa was 250 patients a day. It was daunting. It was overwhelming. It was incredible. 250 patients a day. And my team saw 250. We do not shut down a clinic at any given time. We will stay until we see everybody that came to see us. If that's a 12-hour day, a 14-hour day, in Africa, sometimes it was a 20-hour day. And we'd wake up the next morning at 4 or 5 a.m. and there would be a line of 100 people already. So if you came to see us, we would see you. These people walked for miles, and we're not going to tell them, oh, it's 5 o'clock, we're done for the day. That's not how that works. So we saw everybody. This was our clinic. It was a tent that we were lucky enough to get from the World Health Organization. So who gave us a tent? And you can see just, hundreds of people waiting to see us. And we had to have an interpreter. They speak Portuguese in Mozambique. So we had to have an interpreter and a provider at each station. We got it done. Uganda, Africa. This was a humanitarian aid crisis. There's Miles again. And so again, like we do in the Philippines, we look for places that are chronically medically underserved that may benefit from a 5-year initiative from us, where we train local people to do basic healthcare and then support them medicine-wise and clinic-wise and telemedicine-wise until they're up on their feet and running. And this was our first year. Unfortunately, This was in March of 2020. And so we started this, and then the pandemic hit, and we have not been back as of yet. But we're back to the point now where we're starting to look at all of these again. This was our clinic. We went to an orphanage, or a school, actually. Well, a school/orphanage. And sometimes there's not structures to put us in. So we literally throw a tarp on the ground, and that becomes our clinic. So we just make do with what we've got, do the best we can with what we have. Sometimes we'll have some sort of tent or structure that they'll let us use. And again, that's exactly what we do, make do with what we have. So we're always grateful when we've got something over our head, because I'm telling you, it's hot. That disasters and medically underserved never happen in cold places. They're always hot. And this Alaskan girl does not do well in the heat. I manage, but so when we've got a tent, I'm always grateful. This was Louisiana. Interestingly, the hurricane in Louisiana happened in August and again in October. So 2 months apart, actually it was like 6 weeks, the same place got hit by major hurricanes twice. So I now have family in Louisiana because the fire department took us in, they fed us, they housed us. They were amazing individuals. And this was a great example of this area had never been hit by a major hurricane before. And so the entire community was without electricity and food and water. And we were able to find all the players that had all the things and bring them to a central location, which was this fire department, and start a drive-through. So you pulled in the front bay of the fire department, and they will load you up with food and water and cleaning supplies and tarps. And if you had a hole in your roof, the volunteer firefighters would come and put the tarp on. But like, we arranged all of that so they could find what they needed in one stop. If you needed medical, you pulled through and you parked and you came in, and we ran a clinic inside. So that was pretty, because this was their hospital. This is what happened to their hospital. So one of the things when I decide where we're going to go is deciding whether the medical infrastructure has been overwhelmed. So it may be, especially in America, it may be a pretty significant tornado or hurricane or flood or whatever the case may be. What I look at is the medical infrastructure destroyed or overwhelmed to the point that they actually need someone to come in and do medical? Because just because you can does not always mean that you should. So I don't want to show up just for the sake of showing up. I want to make sure that we can affect the most amount of good for the most amount of people. So one of the things that's my responsibility is picking where we go. Places like Florida, although we just recently went there, rarely need us because they are so often hit by hurricanes. They have mobile medical infrastructures that are impressive. So they rarely need outside help. Places like Louisiana, which do not have the same type of money and infrastructure that Florida has, definitely needs our help. So that's how we make that differentiation. Again, this was a Haiti response. There's Miles again. He's like a bad penny. No, I'm just kidding. We love Miles. Anytime Miles can go with us, we're grateful. So this was the earthquake that just happened a couple of years ago. And again, we're talking about a third world country that is chronically medically underserved on its best day, that does not have building codes, that 99% of the country lives in abject poverty, got hit by a huge hurricane. And so we ended up going, and this is actually the airport. So the hospitals were either destroyed and or completely overwhelmed. So we we made a hospital. This is the tarmac where the helicopters land. So we made this little hospital right off the tarmac. And again, this was a case of us finding other players that were in the area, because the 5 of us are not going to be able to do this by ourselves. So finding other organizations that are in the area, saying, do you want to team up with us? Like the Coast Guard is here, the Marine Corps is here, there's all kinds of helicopters here. Let's coordinate, let's send teams out to the village, let's find their sick, let's fly them back in, so we did exactly that. It's a coordinated effort, and it worked very well. Hurricane Fiona in Puerto Rico, again, going to Puerto Rico, part of the problem is mudslides. So this is well after the hurricane, although we try to be in within 24 hours of the hurricane hitting. Puerto Rico, it's a little bit challenging because the runway has to open before we can get there. Other places, sometimes we can boat in, sometimes we can helicopter in. The last hurricane we went to Florida, I actually flew into Georgia and sat on the border of Georgia until the hurricane passed, and then I drove in. So we were in there within 12 hours because I think it's important. People die within the first 24 hours of a natural disaster from things that wouldn't normally kill somebody. But when you're trapped on the hillside and you can't get down to dialysis, it can be fatal. When you can't get down and you're being your kids being tube fed, that could be fatal. And so we try to get there as soon as possible. We often run into challenges such as, we're driving along and this boulder just sort of rolls down the hill because the ground is so saturated, everything is so wet. Things just slide off the hills on a regular basis. We meet with local officials. Again, we don't want to be the lone cowboy. We want to bring in as many people as we can to work collaboratively. So these are the local officials in a town called Utuado, and it's way up in the mountains. No electricity, no running water because of the hurricane. So this is us having a logistics meeting with them. And the question that we usually ask is, where are your elderly and where are your children? And so take us to people that are homebound. And one of the things I love about Puerto Rico that I sort of have a wish for nationwide is there is a community leader in each neighborhood that knows where the elderly and the infirm live. They know where people are sick. They know where they're vulnerable children. And so you just have to be able to find that individual. And then they will literally take you house to house, like Maria here. So Maria is the leader for her community, and she took us exactly where we needed to be, to the people who were the most vulnerable. And then those people would say, thank you for coming and seeing us. Have you seen the old couple that live up the street 4 houses down? So they would sort of direct us to the next place. It's an amazing show of unity. I see it over and over again in Puerto Rico. So this is us basically going house to house. And again, we took water, we took food. We also take things like Ensure for the elders to drink, things like Depends, diapers for babies, formula, fresh water to mix formula with because all the water is contaminated. So we take those things as well. And I think here we're delivering formula, diapers, and medicine. And we carry not only prescription medicine, but we carry basic medicine, like anything over the counter that you can think of, Tylenol, ibuprofen, cough medicine, children's Benadryl, et cetera, because they don't have the accessibility to get it because they can't get down from the mountain unless they ride the, donkeys or the Jeeps like we did. Or they just can't afford it. So we try to provide it for them. Now, recently, just a month or so ago, maybe 2 months ago, Florida got hit by a huge hurricane. Like I said before, we rarely go to Florida because Florida's medical infrastructure is such that they usually don't need us. Like, they're impressive. Unfortunately, they're impressive because they get hit with hurricanes so often that they have it down to a science. They have mobile medical hospitals and clinics that they can set up almost instantly. This hurricane was of such a magnitude, however, that even that was overwhelmed. And we've gotten to the point now that we've done enough missions and we're well enough known that Florida actually called me and asked me if I would bring a team, because one of the things that they were missing is people that were able to go door to door and find people who were trapped and or needed medical. And so they called us. And the reason I find this picture interesting, I took more team than this, but that's a roof on a power line. So I'm like, well, that's a pretty powerful picture. So we went and literally went door to door and checked on people to see where they were. The streets were mostly clear, which is the nice thing about most contiguous United States responses, is usually I can find a vehicle somewhere. I try to keep my teams to just enough people that will fit in a single vehicle, because a couple of things happen. They do surge pricing for vehicle rentals in places that have hurricanes. So a vehicle that would have cost me $200 for the week before is now costing me $2,000 that week.
Wow.
So I try not to rent more than one vehicle. Fuel is in extremely limited supplies, so as you can imagine. So we just have to be really logistically careful. So I try to limit my teams basically to 4 to 6 because of, vehicle and fitting them all in one, and trying to find a place to stay, find a team house, et cetera, et cetera. So we managed to find a vehicle. And again, you saw this in other slides. This is someone's life on the street. And I always find this really profound, that it's literally their entire life on the street. All their baby's toys, all their clothing, all their appliances, nothing is salvageable. When you have water that comes 6-8 feet up into your house, nothing is salvageable. Because in places like Florida, the black mold starts immediately. And so it's not just the cloth things that have to be thrown out. All the wood is warped, the humidity warps everything. Like it's just, so it's pretty, first of all, the smell, and I don't even know that I can describe it, because it's, rotted food and black mold and wet stuff. But then just to walk down the street and see someone's entire life sitting on the curb, and just the profoundness of that, even if they don't need a whole lot of medical, this is going to take years to recover from. This is a lifetime collection of stuff, that means something to you. It means something to you. And now you don't have that. So it's pretty profound. Obviously, again, more destruction. These palm trees, everywhere I go, palm trees are probably the sturdiest trees I've ever seen. When you've got downed palm trees, that you've got some kind of storm going on, because it can knock over a palm tree. It's pretty impressive. They're hardy. These palm trees are hardy. There's a lot of trailer parks in Florida. This was Fort Myers. And there's a lot of trailer parks in Fort Myers. They do not fare well in hurricanes. They just don't. I had never seen this before in any response that I'd ever been to. These are fish, tilapia to be specific. And at one point, another team reported to me, not our team, but another organization reported to me that they found a dolphin and a manatee in someone's yard. And it's because the water came in so quickly, it brought the ocean with it, and it left so quickly, it left the ocean behind. So literally, this is hundreds of fish just everywhere. Again, not sure I can describe that smell to you, but it was not pretty. And so, yeah, it was just, I'd never seen that before. And I've been to dozens of hurricane responses. Just the swiftness, it was almost like a tsunami. The way that the survivors were describing it to me is how quickly the water came in and how quickly it receded. And one of the challenges, and I try to educate as we go, is people who live in areas like this have to keep an axe in their attic. Because what happens is the floodwaters come in so quickly that they go higher and higher and higher and higher in their house until finally they're in their attic and there's no escape route. And then the water floods the attic. And so we don't do specific search and rescue. However, if someone tells us we haven't seen Mr. and Mrs. Jones since the hurricane, we go to their house and the first place we look is the attic. And unfortunately, a lot of times we'll find people there. So if you live in a flood area, if you live in a hurricane area, put a hand axe in your attic so you can chop a hole in the roof and get yourself out. That would be my best advice if you live in these types of areas. So as I said before, We work with other organizations. This is World Central Kitchen. Anna happens to be a volunteer for me, but she is employed by World Central Kitchen. So when she's not working for World Central Kitchen, she'll volunteer with MMI and go on missions, or we'll be on a mission and we find Anna, because World Central Kitchen feeds, they do a phenomenal job. They go all over the world. They do what we do with food. And I'm not talking about boxed lunches. I'm talking about they research the culinary tastes of the, if it's of the area. If it's Africa, they're cooking local regional African food. You know, this was Florida, so they were cooking American food, and they do it, they're hot meals. And they bring massive amounts of equipment and people, et cetera, et cetera. So we always try to find World Central Kitchen, because where they're feeding large amounts of people is usually where medical is needed. And then conversely, when we find a large pocket of people who need medical, we contact World Central Kitchen to bring in food. So a symbiotic relationship. So this is little Miss Anna and us trying to find some food, basically. And as I said before, we try to work with all the players. This is a Walmart parking lot. And part of the problem was that because the electricity was out for so long, it's not that these people, you know, were chronically, you know, underserved and didn't have food to start with. It's that all the food was spoiled because the refrigeration was all gone. So World Central Kitchen is setting up, handing out hot food 3 times a day. And we set up a little tent. So when people came to get food, if they had medical needs, we could address them. Or a lot of times people would say, I'm picking up meals for my family and the elder couple that lives right next door. And, you know, so we would follow them home and check on the elders. Or I'm picking up this food for this single mom who has 4 kids. And, you know, they've all got cold. So, sorry, they've all got cold. So we would follow them back and check these kids. So that's a shot of us where we were set up in World Central Kitchen. Because here's the problem. Walmart was open, but nothing that was refrigerated was salvageable. So Walmart was only open for dry goods. And as you can imagine, you know, there's a run on dry goods. None of the cash registers worked. They were running lights by generator. So it had to be cash only. So things get sort of pared down to the bare minimum. But I thought this was a pretty profound picture of why it's important to have food as well as medical. You know, you think about people being hurt in a hurricane and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But if they don't get electricity for 4 or 5 days, they go hungry. So this was a huge Walmart. Nothing on it. It kind of looks like an Alaskan Walmart when the ocean freezes and we can't get our delivery. Our Walmarts look like this every once in a while too. But now, our most recent missions for refugee crisis have been Ukraine, for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So because Ukraine is dangerous and we are not combat medics. Again, just because you can does not mean that you should. And one of my first priorities is safety for my teams. So we stationed in Romania, and then we would have for the Ukrainian refugees as they cross the border. So we stayed in this town right here that's spelled Galati, but it's pronounced Galach. So we stayed here. This is Ukraine. This is Moldova, but this is all Ukraine right here. And this is a Danube River. So it was literally a Danube River crossing from Ukraine. There's a hospital here in Odessa. Every once in a while, we would sort of sneak across the border and pick up patients and bring them back. But for the most part, the Ukrainians were brought into the city of Galach, which had a huge university. I've never seen this response in a refugee crisis ever. So usually, as you saw in Greece and you saw in Mexico, people are just housed, you know, in encampments. Romania opened up their university. So they sent all their college students home and they made the dorms refugee housing. So, and they also provided them with food. And within 24 hours of their arrival, immigration would show up and make them a Romanian citizen for 12 or for a year, for 12 months. So they were able to go get jobs. They could put their kids in school. They could rent an apartment, whatever it is that they needed to do. They made them citizens. It was amazing. Part of the problem, though, is that there were no men. It was all women and children, because any man over the age of 16 cannot leave Ukraine. They have to stay and fight. So it was all women, children, elders. And this was my group. This is Radu, who was the director of the search and rescue that we teamed up with in Romania. And he was the one that was in charge of the refugees in the college. So what the search and rescue crew did on a regular basis is they actually went into Ukraine. And so what they would do is they would go into Ukraine in places that have been bombed or hit by Russia. They, as soon as the Russian forces would leave, these guys would go in and get all the really sick and injured and bring them back into Romania, into safety and into medical. These are kids that are 17 to 24 years old. These are college students that were going to school to learn how to be search and rescue, that have now been tasked with being search and rescue in a war zone. So we provided training for them. We've been there 3 or 4 times now. And not only do we help them with their refugee medicine, we started providing them with training. Simple things. The Odessa hospital in Ukraine called me and said, soldiers are dying that don't need to die. And when I say Ukrainian soldiers, I'm talking about 6 months ago, they were school teachers, they were high school seniors, they were shopkeepers. These were just everyday people that have been conscripted to be soldiers. So they taught them how to use military weaponry. They did not teach them any first aid. So the director of the Odessa hospital called me and said, they're bleeding to death, that they don't know how to stop a bleed. Like they're picking up these soldiers from the front line and they're driving them to the hospital. By the time they get here, these kids are dead, when if they put pressure on it, they wouldn't have died, but they didn't know. So we started teaching these kids how to do those things, so they in turn can start teaching the soldiers in Ukraine. We are supposed to be going back in a couple of months and teaching actually Ukrainian soldiers that are going to rotate out of Ukraine and come into Romania for our education. But that's what we're doing here, basically, is we are teaching these children combat medicine. These children combat medicine. That's a profound statement. We're teaching these children combat medicine so they can go in and save the children that are fighting, because they're so young. So not only are we doing medicine for the refugees, we are also trying to help train these kids. This is just me with some of the refugee kids. Like I said, it's all women, children, and elders, because the men have been left behind. And Ukraine is still a very patriarchal society. As a general rule, the women stay home, and they're still, like I said, patriarchal. They stay home and they raise the kids, and they do things like that, and they're entirely dependent on their men. Again, a generalized statement, but dependent on their men for their income. And now the men are gone, so they're off fighting or they've been killed. And so these women are not used to being independent. So there's a lot of emotional trauma, and as well as, people that have pre-existing conditions. And again, anytime you get large groups of people together, whether they're being housed in tents or they're being housed on a university campus, you put a bunch of people together, sickness is going to go around, right? We're all aware of that because of Corona. We also donated a bunch of medication. And this is how amazing my volunteers are. I'm just so impressed by this group of individuals that gives up their time. Sean, like I said, works in London. So in order to get all of these medical supplies over to Romania where they needed to be, was just cost prohibitive to ship. I have them. I got them, donated to us, but to ship it over there was so cost prohibitive and we weren't sure it was going to get there. So we shipped them to Sean and he drove to Romania. He got on a ferry somewhere in Paris and then crossed some river. Like, I don't know exactly, but he drove to Romania from London specifically so we could donate these supplies to these people so they would have the equipment they need to do the medicine we were trying to teach them. Like that's going above and beyond. Like it was amazing. The rest of us flew in. Sean drove in. I think it took him like 6 days. Like it's amazing. But anyway, we donated a bunch of equipment. This is an ongoing missive for us. I have promised Radu and this Romanian search and rescue team that we will be available to them for the duration of this war. So right now they have influxes of refugees depending on where the bombing is occurring, because some of them go to Poland, some of them go to Ukraine, sort of wraps around a couple of countries. So if they get an influx of refugees again, if they get a bunch of new volunteers, if they need continued training, then we will go back and we'll make that happen for them. So we've sort of committed to them for the duration of this war. So I'm sure that we'll be back in Romania. This is a week ago today. I was named a CNN, Mobile Medics International. I just happen to be the face of it. Was nominated as a CNN top 10 hero. And so that video clip is available online if you're interested in watching it. It was an amazing weekend. It was meet the other 9 of the top 10 of us was truly inspirational. And we're going to be doing some collaborations together. One of the top 10 is from Kenya. We're going to go to Kenya and do some medicine for her village, et cetera, et cetera. But it was an honor to be named a top 10 hero of 2022. And honestly, what I said then, and I still say it now, is I'm sort of the face of MMI, but MMI functions because of my volunteers. MMI functions because there are 100 people all over the world who pick up the phone when I call and say, I would love to go sleep in a tent and eat MREs for a week and poop in a hole. That sounds fantastic. So that's who the true heroes are, is the people who are willing to do that. And I'm talking doctors and nurses and paramedics and people whose that's not their everyday life, but they just make it happen. So yeah, my volunteers are amazing, but that was an amazing weekend and we're thrilled with the honor. All right, so that is my presentation. I'm trying to stay within the time constraints. So at this point, I'm willing to take questions if anybody has any.
Oh, Teresa. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
That was just fascinating. And there's a couple of questions coming up, but I have to ask, how did this start? I mean, this is so well done and so important, but what motivated you to start this?
So in 2015, I was semi-retired from paramedicine. I was a stay-at-home mom. I adopted 2 children from an Eskimo village here, but so I decided to stay home and raise them. And I was watching the news and I saw the Syrian refugee crisis for the first time. It had been going on for a while, but it just now was making American news. And there was a picture of a dead baby in the surf, like in the water.
Yes.
And I thought, what is happening? Like, babies are not falling out of boat. Like, this is not, no, that's exactly what's happening. So I became aware of the Syrian refugee crisis. And I thought, I once saw a quote that resonated with me that said, somebody should do something about that. And then I realized I am somebody. So I realized that I have this medical skill set. And so like within 30 days, I got on a plane and I traveled with a different NGO, a different medical organization. And I went to Greece and then we did a trip to, I think, Haiti. And I just saw this need for this rapid response team. I saw a lot of medical players that were set up saying, we're here. And so you come see us. And I thought, well, who's going up in the mountains? Who's helicoptering into the villages in Haiti? Who's riding donkeys up into the barrios of Puerto Rico? Like, who's getting those people? And because I didn't want to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
And quite honestly, I knew nothing about running an NGO. So
Well,
I'm
you're
like,
doing a pretty good job.
right? I'm like, I don't really want to do this. I want to find someone who does it and go with them. And then I discovered I couldn't find anybody who did that. And so I thought, well, apparently I'm sort of overly confident and slightly arrogant enough to think I could do it myself. So I did.
You've got that Alaskan moxie that I
do.
Yeah, you really do.
Yeah.
I have to get to my questions because I could talk to you all day long, but I gotta get back to my job here. There's a question from Nada. Do the pharmaceutical companies donate or give you discounts on supplies for the equipment that you need? Where do you get your equipment?
Oh, that's a great question, Nada. Thank you. So amazingly, I have an organization that provides plane tickets for all of my volunteers. So they donate flights to get my people to where they need to get. I have an organization here in Anchorage that collects surplus medical supplies that gives me all my sort of disposable bandaging and wound care and that kind of stuff. And then I have a pharmacy in Oklahoma that only sells medications to nonprofit NGOs like mine at cost. So I can get 1,000 Bactrim for $75.
Okay.
So I do have a discount pharmacy. Unfortunately, it's not available to the general public. And earlier I alluded to an American response versus an international response. I am not allowed to use those antibiotics within the United States. I can only use them in a foreign country. So, glean from that what you will, that you can get 1,000 Bactrim for $75 when you pay $110 for a 30-day supply. I'm just saying. So anyway, yes, I have organizations that provide me flights, medical equipment, and discounted medications. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Folks, Dave McMillan's put in a link to Teresa's CNN Hero link. So it's in the chat. Just wanted to let you know it's there. Mike Burchett, you have a question from Friendly House. Come on in.
One of the unfortunate byproducts of natural disasters and other humanitarian problems is crime and corruption. How much of that does your teams have to deal with in order to get over there to do your job?
Every time. Every time. Not in the United States. I can tell. Now, in the United States, there's a lot of looting and things like that of stores. I've never felt unsafe in the US, quite frankly. There are some countries that is the cost of doing business. Like, you are expected to bribe the officials to be able to get your medication in country in the airport. You are expected to bribe people to get access to water and to open a road. You're expected to bribe the gang leader to let you through. Those are just the cost of doing business, quite frankly. And so we factor that into our missions, that we're going to have to bribe people. In a lot of countries, that's the way business is done. We'll get to the airport and have an entire suitcase of antibiotics. And if we want to take that into country, we need to bribe the airport officials. And then when we're driving down a road and the gangs will stop us, and we have to bribe those guys to let us through. A lot of countries, we hire security when we get to the country. And we always want in-country security because they understand the infrastructure. But yes, that's a part of doing business.
Usury, in other words.
Yeah.
Teresa, you with going out into the field like you do, having boulders slide down mountains. Yeah. Your people, your volunteers are, to me, in a more dangerous situation than for the folks that set up camp and stay at the camp. For two questions, how have anyone, how do they get in? Do your volunteers get hurt? And secondly, how do you get your volunteers? Why MMT rather than Doctors Without Borders?
So nobody, knock on wood, has been seriously injured on a mission, because I take safety really important. And we try to vet as much as we possibly can. We try to hire security before we get there. We try to mitigate as much danger as we can, but there's always danger. We have protocols about where we can go, that everybody has to be together, that, we have a bunch of protocols, and I micromanage the hell out of a mission. When we are together, you don't go to the bathroom without a buddy, right? Like, you don't, like we're hyper vigilant with each other. So it is very dangerous, or it can be very dangerous. And so I get my volunteers mostly by word of mouth, or like the CNN exposure has gotten me a bunch of applications. And when I interview someone to come with MMI, it has nothing to do with medicine. If you are medically licensed, I don't know what your medicine is like until I get you in country. And even if you are medically licensed, you've probably never done this type of medicine. So we are always willing to teach you if you're willing to learn. What I interview you for is, do I want to sleep in a tent with you for 10 days? Can you go without a shower for 5 or 6 days? Can you wear the same clothes for 3 or 4 days in a week? And do you mind peeing in a bush? Like, that's what I interview you for. It's more about personality and sort of mindset than it is about medicine. So I don't lack in volunteers. I've never not been able to do a mission because someone didn't volunteer for it.
Wow. So what happens that first trip? Dave, hang on, I've got a question here. Dave, I think Dave, there's a Dave, I bet it's Dave DiNucci at Friendly House. Come on in, Dave. I'm hogging this.
I bet it is too. So I was racing in and out during the whole thing, and I caught most of it. But this question might repeat some things. So, but first of all, you just mentioned you're not lacking for volunteers when you need them. This new exposure for this hero award might, help you get more volunteers. Are you prepared for growth? That is, are you, or would you prefer to stay about the size you're at, or are you prepared to really get lots of people, and maybe that means growing your organization and adding levels of hierarchy and all that stuff that some people don't like to do?
No, we are absolutely prepared for growth. So when we were nominated just to be a CNN hero, not even the top 10, we started to build our infrastructure with the anticipation that if we make top 10, this is going to be sort of life-changing for the organization, which it actually has been. What I'm really cognitively aware of is I never want to be Doctors Without Borders size. I always want to be small mobile teams. What I'd like to be is 2 teams out at the same time. What I'd like to be is, because I literally went from Puerto Rico home for 2 days and then to Florida. So I would have liked to have stayed in Puerto Rico. So I'd like 2 teams out at the same time. I would like to be able to afford to, rent 2 vehicles. When we went to the Bahamas, that was unbelievable destruction. And I had 8 people with me, but, so we're ready to grow. We're ready to expand, but not too much. I mean, not huge. I've also found that the bigger you get, the longer it takes to get anywhere. The more red tape there is, the more people I have to ask permission to do something for, the longer it takes. And so I don't want to have to ask a bunch of people. I don't want to ask a committee to build me a horse and I end up with a camel. I want, right? I want to be able to say a hurricane just hit Florida and have a team en route within 24 hours. That by necessity keeps it small and sort of intimate. So we are ready for some growth, but not we're gonna keep it humble and small.
And sort of related to that, you're not seeing any sort of stepping on toes with organizations like Doctors Without Borders or things like that so far. I mean, you're all just working together and everything's.
We work beautifully collaboratively. So Doctors Without Borders is the biggest one. It's actually Medicine Sans Frontier. And then there's another organization out of Spain called España that does the same thing. They will actually call us and say, did you just see what happened in the Bahamas? We're going to be 10 days before we can get there and get set up. Are you guys going in? Yep, we're going to be there. Let us know where you are. We'll bring patients. Like there's no, well, there is some ego, not from us, but we work really well with other orgs.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Dave. Hank, Rob, come on in. You have a question.
Hello. I heard you earlier mention the phrase shelter box. I know that Rotary International provides shelter boxes. Do you have any connection with organizations like that?
I do not. I would love to go speak to Rotaries at some point, but we got that shelter box, believe it or not. Well, I'm just going to tell you how we got it. You can do with it what you will. We got that shelter box because an organization that I won't name threw 4 of them away, brand new. And somebody called us and said, so-and-so just put a bunch of shelter boxes out by the dumpster behind, wherever. And I went and picked them up. That's how I got those shelter boxes. I had 4, but I usually leave them. I'll take them to a place and then I'll leave them in a place. Like I left one at the orphanage in Haiti. I found a family living in a cave in Puerto Rico. So I left them a shelter box. So yeah, I don't officially have any affiliation with them. I literally sort of got those brand new shelter boxes out of the garbage. They've been amazing. And I would love to have an affiliation with them, but shelter boxes are about $800 or $900 a piece. And so then I'm taxed with one of our biggest expenses, baggage fees. Yeah. So do I take a shelter box as a piece of equipment, or do I take a tarp and rope, right? That I don't have to check as a baggage, so I can take more medicine. Because with a tarp and a rope, I can make me someplace to see patients. It's always sort of a toss up. So yeah. Did that answer your question, Hank?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, you're welcome.
Teresa, could you just real briefly re-explain shelter box? So I missed it, I think.
So shelter box is basically a giant tent. And the Rotary International sort of sponsors them. Like they buy them and they give them to organizations to disperse. And they're amazing. You can get them in a number. You can get them just the tent itself. And it usually sleeps 8.
Okay.
So you can get just the tent itself, or you can get a tent that comes with like a full kitchen setup. You can also get them that has a kitchen and a stove set up. You can put like a little wood burning stove in there, and it's meant to be semi-temporary shelter and housing for people who have lost their housing. They're amazing, well-built, quality. And then they all pack down, the basic ones with no extras, pack down to about 35 pounds in like a carry case.
Yeah, that you could ship on an airplane. You could ship.
You could ship on an airplane, yeah. Yeah. But every bag costs me $100 now. So
okay. We got our final question. Jules, you got your hand up. Come on in. This will be our last question. Come on.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. So it's not too far-fetched for me to call you Mother Teresa. Well, you're the next generation of Mother Teresas.
Well, technically my name's Teresa and I am a mother, so I suppose it's close.
Yeah, isn't it appropriate?
Yeah.
And what I'm amazed is your centrality. You're even in your discussions about how you deal with challenges, you're central. You're the kind of person that should run a large corporation to get them to do things right. But here's my question. You were exposed to TB, HIV, noro. I mean, I can go on endlessly. How do you prevent or give you and your group some degree of protection knowing what you're going to encounter in those environments?
Well,
Great question.
we try to vaccine for what we can vaccine for. Anytime we come out of Africa, my team prophylactically deworms themselves because we do have, every time you come out of Africa, you got worms. So you just take the deworming medication for a week after you get home. Every time we come home from a mission, because we're healthcare providers, we sort of quarantine for a little bit, and then we COVID test ourselves on a regular basis to make sure that we're safe before we go back. We just sort of do, when we were in Africa and cholera was everywhere, the World Health Organization gave us a bunch of cholera vaccines to distribute amongst the people. So we all took a cholera vaccine, and a cholera vaccine is just it's a little drink. It's not a shot. So we just do the best we can. We try to use best practices because, quite honestly, there's usually not a place to wash your hands with soap and water. So we go through a lot of hand sanitizer. We've all learned really well. We don't touch our faces. We're kind of like Marines in that aspect. I don't know if you've ever been in the Marine Corps, but you don't touch your face. We don't touch our faces as a general rule. So knock on wood, we've had a couple people we've had a couple people hospitalized. One of my folks got cholera in Uganda and had to be hospitalized in Uganda. And then one of my folks had some sort of, I don't even know what, some sort of norovirus, whatever, when she got back to Seattle and was hospitalized. But other than that, knock on wood, we just try to do the best that we can.
Teresa.
Again, kudos to you, and
Thank
may
you.
you have the fortitude and strength to continue your good work.
Thank you. And I will say this, we are 100% donation funded. That's how we fund our organization. We don't have any grants. We don't have anybody on payroll. We just are 100% donation funded. And I bring this up because one of the perks of being the CNN top 10 of the year is that Subaru, the car company, has set up a GoFundMe campaign that between now and next week is doing matching funds. So any donation through that GoFundMe link will be matched dollar for dollar by Subaru up to $50,000. And I don't want to leave any money on the table. I think this morning we were at 30,000. So if any of you are inclined to donate, we would appreciate it because it will double your donations. But so I just want to sort of throw that out there.
So how do we connect to that Subaru site?
I can send the GoFundMe link. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll send the GoFundMe link. And then you guys have a page or like I don't know how you can distribute it to everybody, but you can also go under GoFundMe and the reason it has to specifically go through the GoFundMe to be doubled. Or under, if you go to the GoFundMe page and search Mobile Medics International, it'll pop up. You'll see it as well,
Oh.
but I'll send a link.
Yeah, if you send us a link, we can distribute it. Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Teresa, this was just phenomenal that you were able to build from really nothing to such a really mobile unit that's meeting a need. You're the ambulance, you're the paramedics of
Right.
these efforts. It makes such perfect sense, but
Mhm.
I don't think anyone ever thought of it until you did. So
Apparently not. I couldn't find it, but
yeah, so you built it. Good for you.
Yeah.
Wow.